All right, lesson 4 of this credit recovery world history. We're going to be looking at one kind of similar to the last lesson, where it was the Indus Valley people. This is going to be talking about ancient Mesopotamia. So, again, an area of the world, not one specific city state, but we're going to look at a group of people that all kind of identified together because they have similar cultural habits. So, again, we're talking about how people use the environment to settle down and the causes and effects that kind of go with that. So please make sure you're listening for the group that's certainly into the Mesopotamian era. So you could talk about Sumer. There's a city-state called Ur. There's this one called Babylonia, which, we don't really care about that hardcore specifics. We care about the area as a whole. So again, here are the things you need to know. So on a present map or a modern map, this is where it is, this green area, and it's known as the Fertile Crescent. So this is a big deal because Fertile Crescent, fertile land, agriculture. You're also going to notice it's in between two rivers, and that's actually what it translates to. It's Greek for the land between the two rivers. So this is in modern day Iraq, if you really want to get hardcore specific. But why it matters to us is that this group actually came about before the Indus Valley region. So they're going to actually do some trading with one another. And that's how we actually figured out parts of the Indus Valley, according to John Green. So be thinking, what environmental influences did I just talk about? But here are the 7 characteristics of a civilization again. And I covered them last time, so I'm not going to go too hardcore in them. But again, which ones of these have the best chance of using the environment? Because again, at the end of this unit, you're going to be talking about how people use the environment to sell in one spot. So going into the 7 characteristics specifically for Mesopotamians, you need to think about how they're going to eat. They don't eat, they don't survive. Well, they're going to eat by farming, like I said. They're going to use irrigation systems to help control the flooding in their area. And all the while, they're going to use it to water their crops. So that's going to be a big deal because, got to eat. Also, they had some soil there that was pretty dang good, and they had to use a plow. So here you go. Here are some oxen. In picture's blurry, but you can see there's a plow behind them. It's basically used to break up the soil. You cannot grow anything on soil that's harder than a rock. So these two things kind of help the Mesopotamians thrive. So, first question, true or false? The Mesopotamians used environmental factors to create a stable food supply. And the social class system. So again, they got to have some sort of hierarchy in their people. Well, this group of people, they had them as well. So we know that they actually had a king, which is the system of government. So it's two birds, one stone. Right below that are going to be the priests, which means they have a religion. Again, there's a third bird with one stone. And then we have skilled craftspeople, people that are going to be making things out of the earth. Here we go. Now we're starting to check a lot of boxes. And farmers and laborers, the people that are going to keep all of these top people above them alive because they don't have to be farmers because they are doing the workers. But then they have slavery. And then here's where we're going to get into a dark topic in world history. So slavery has been around for a long, long time. People end up being slaves for various reasons, but it's mostly during times of war. If you're conquered, you're overtaken by another group, you usually become a slave. Or you owe somebody money, you have to devote your life to them to pay them back to some sort. So during this time, the social classes, you could break them down even smaller if you want, but men and females. So these are the stereotypical gender roles that you see throughout the course of most history, but they had a social class system. So true or false, the Mesopotamians directly used the environmental factors in their social class system. So going into their system of government, I've already talked about this, but they had a monarchy, which means they had a king. So that means at some point, one person emerged as more powerful than the other. They probably saw themselves as gods on earth because God gave them the power, the leadership, the whatever, in order to be the leader of men. So their jobs basically included things that government normally do. They collect taxes, they got to enforce the law to some degree, and they made sure that there wasn't any problems with irrigation systems, or if they ever need to lead the army during a time of war or conflict, that they would be it. Now, there's one king in particular, and his name is Hammurabi, and I forgot to point him out, but this is supposedly him. He is going to be important in the history of mankind because he is the first to have written law. So this is a big deal. and they're posted in the city square where everybody can see them. And people know that if you break these laws, you will be punished. So he's actually the dude that came up with an eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth, meaning if you and I got in a fight and I somehow injured your eye and you end up losing it, then technically you could take my eye out. Yeah. So they go a lot deeper into that as well. But for our purposes, that's cause and effect to a degree. So Hammurabi, big, big deal. So true or false, Mesopotamians used the environmental factors in their system of government. So the religion, they were a polytheistic civilization, which meant that they had more than one god. So probably a common thing that you can think of that's polytheistic would be like the Native Americans. They have spirits of wind, spirits of water, spirits of land, the sun, whichever. So the different types of gods that they had are not really important to us. But the fact that they had some sense of a higher power belief, that is what's important to us. And they actually had these holy buildings called ziggurats, and these things were absolutely massive. And this was usually located in the center of their towns. And if you notice, they served more than one function. This is where everybody basically had their social network, if you will. But the reason why they took such good care of these things, because they thought that they would make the gods happy, and then that life would be better. So that leads us into culture. So culture by itself is a ginormous topic. What makes a group of people them, their music, their religion, their crafts, and whichever. And here is everything wrapped up in one. So you're going to notice that the Mesopotamians are going to be the first to leave behind an active culture. So meaning we can find their jewelry, we can find their weapons, we can find the stuff that they made from elements from the earth. All of these are metals, which means they use the earth to make stuff. Okay, so which leads us to this picture right here. This is actually called a lyre. It's kind of like a harp, if you want to think of it that way. And music was always going in Mesopotamia because they thought it made the gods happy and it made common people happy. So they were really the first to unlock this magic. And I like music when I'm doing work too. So here's my question for you. True or false, the Mesopotamians used environmental factors in their culture and arts? Which then leads us to our last bit, technology. Actually, no, it's not our last bit. I lied. Written language is the last bit. But technology. Okay, here's a list of basically the inventions that the Mesopotamians are known or credited for. And there's no bigger one than the wheel and axle. I almost guarantee you use something like this every single day. I would beg to differ that some of you guys don't use clocks because some of you are still tardy to class, but crap happens. But anyways, the wheel and the plow, that's going to make things a lot easier for travel, for farming, and again, just making civilization easier, if you will. And then lastly, there it is, the written language. And you're going to notice that we actually can read their language, unlike the Indus Valley people. Their writing is actually called cuneiform, and they left it behind, and it looks something like this. Okay, they actually wrote it in wet clay, which then hardens to some sort of stone. And they actually used different reeds, if you know what that is. It's like a really hard stick, I guess you would say, to scrape it in. And what's funny is that most things that were written down were basically business contracts to some degree, meaning I'll give you this many sheep for this amount of corn or whichever. But the fact that they wrote it down is huge because now this is going to actually lead to history. Even though it's about boring things like farming, it's still history. So, true or false? The Mesopotamians used environmental factors in their written language.